Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
That the British state may soon cease to exist, lose half of its landmass and much of its lustre is a pretty big story, getting remarkably little coverage.
In 2014, most people thought the question of Scottish separation had been settled, albeit by just 55 to 45% in the independence referendum. Certainly, the Scottish government had been at pains to say that this was a referendum which would not be repeated for a generation.
Everything comes around more quickly nowadays. A generation turned out to be a couple of short football seasons, and the SNP government is currently consulting on Indyref too.
The proximate cause of the second in a generation referenda is Brexit, for which anything from leaves on the line to a shortage of marmite is blamed. Scotland voted to remain in the European Union. The Scottish government wants to leave the British Union to join the European.
Joining us now is our Caledonian correspondent, a lawyer and a regular contributor to the royal and ancient Scottish newspaper, The Scotsman. He's Robert McGregor, sometimes known as Rob Roy, at least by me. Robert, thanks for joining us. Let's deal with the obvious contradiction between what Alex Salmond was saying throughout the 2014 referendum, that this is the last chance for a generation, and now, beginning last year in 2016, consulting on a second referendum. On the face of it, that just won't wash.
Well, interestingly, you mentioned Alex Salmond. I actually think it's Alex Salmond that's maybe pushing Nicola Sturgeon for this referendum. It's an important point to make that Nicola Sturgeon has only been the leader and the First Minister for just over 2 years. So I think Sturgeon was playing a long game. She wanted to wait until she knew she would definitely win the next referendum. Because if she loses another one, the SNP lose another one, that is it, finished for a generation. Before, when they had the referendum in 2014, the Achilles heel was the currency issue, wanting to leave the state, but still using the currency and still relying on their bank as a lender of last resort. This time, I think they've got two Achilles heel. One, they've still got the currency issue, but actually, in fact, it's more challenging this time. Because now you've got one state wanting to leave the EU, one state wanting to remain. So the idea that you use the same currency and you use the same bank as a lender of last resort is fantasy stuff, to be honest with you. But the second Achilles heel is actually the economic circumstances in Scotland at the moment. If you look at what's happening just now with the oil price compared to the white paper, and the white paper's quote in 2014, it has fallen dramatically. And this is having an adverse impact in so many areas of the Scottish economy. If you look at growth, it is a third of what the UK average is. If you look at housing, it's half what the UK average is. Yep. And also recent figures have shown that unemployment is actually past the 5.5%
It's up
mark.
in Scotland
It's
and
up.
down in England.
It's up. The Financial Times says it is up at 5.1% the other day. So things are not looking good economically for a referendum. And I think that Nicola Sturgeon is being boxed into this. I think her party, I think Alex Salmond. I mean, only about a month ago, Alex Salmond gave a date for the referendum before Nicola Sturgeon even said she was going to have one. Yeah. So I think she's going to have one because she's almost got no choice, because they've been constantly threatening this all through Brexit, all through the negotiations. And, you know, only a fool would predict who's definitely going to win. But if they thought it was a challenge sailing it in 2014 on the the economics, well, it's nothing compared to the moment.
Well, that's also my view, which would be a reason not to have the referendum. And I'm not as convinced as you that it will definitely happen because of the reasons you've mentioned, plus this additional one. Although the additional one merely exacerbates the point you've already made. If Scotland became an independent country and applied to join the European Union, first they'd need to get in. Second, they would need to, as all new members must, adopt the euro.
Yep.
But only if they met the convergence criterion for being in the euro, which would require a massive wipeout of Scotland's budget deficit, which means effectively the abolition of almost all public services in Scotland. I think that would be a hard sell in itself. But here's the rub. In a country with 5% unemployment, you're going to be in the EU, which allows free movement of European labour.
That's right.
So every Bulgarian in Bulgaria could come and live in Scotland and compete for the jobs that are already in scarce supply.
Yeah.
That's a gigantic ask. I don't know many Scottish people that would vote for that.
Well, yeah, the GDP is it's colossal. It's over 9% at the moment. Double, in fact, I think it might be actually treble what the UK is at the moment. The currency issue was a big factor the last time, and I think it's going to be an even bigger factor this time. I don't think they're going to try and sell the pound. I think they're going to have to adopt a new currency, whether it's a pound or something else.
So neither the pound nor the euro?
No. I think if they try and sell the euro, I think they will be defeated and it will be a bigger margin than last time because I don't think Scots fancy the euro at the moment. And we need to remember just as well, the euro, the whole Eurozone and European Union is not looking too healthy at all at the moment.
No.
You've got right-wing governments coming up in Hungary, and
Netherlands,
Poland,
France,
Netherlands,
Italy. The EU might actually fall apart before Scotland got a chance to join it.
So in 5 years' time, we don't know what the position will be in the European Union. You know, I actually think this is going to be won or lost on the no side, or actually the Remain side. The last time, although they won, it was too negative. They were fear-mongering constantly. And I think they're going to have to adopt a different strategy. I think we can definitely win the minds of the Scottish people based on what we've spoke about, the economics, but we need to win the hearts, to be honest with you, to win this. And to lead this referendum, I actually think they should go out within the political circle. I don't think they should get the leader of the Scottish Labour or leader of the Scottish Conservatives. I think they need someone from the captains of industry, heads of trade unions, heads of charities, and they need to get people involved who are actually not solely political.
Good point. Just before we leave the currency, Scotland once had an ancient currency called the groat. I don't know if the SNP would fancy bringing that back. But you can't just pluck a currency out of thin air, you know. I mean, you can't, it's not monopoly. You can't just say, right, we're minting a new currency. It has to be based on something. What would a Scottish independent currency be based on?
Well, this is the thing. I don't think it's feasible at all to actually start up a new currency, set up your own bank, and have a lender of last resort.
Well, yeah, not one that would have any credibility internationally.
No.
I mean, the bank of the White Heather Club would not actually get much credit from people abroad, in my opinion.
What they might do is they might actually try and sell that we will still use the pound, even if they don't, even if the Bank of England say no, and try and sell that we will go in the euro eventually, or perhaps looking at options, because we need to remember the SNP, what we know is when the referendum comes, they are very well organised, very loud, and they've always got good strategies in winning.
Oh, they're a formidable political machine. Let me turn to the political machines. The SNP are exactly as you just described them, and Nicola Sturgeon is quite an impressive leader. The Scottish Conservative Party are making a comeback. The Tory vote is up everywhere, and they are the second party in the country now. For someone like me, almost impossible to believe. I was in Parliament when there were 0 Tory MPs at all from Scotland. Then there was one taxi phone. The Scottish Labour Party is in a state of really collapse. Its vote has collapsed, its membership has collapsed, and its leader, I mean, is she even there? She's certainly not impinging on my consciousness
This
much.
all despite Jeremy in Westminster.
Well, he hasn't travelled, has he? I mean,
Yeah,
Jeremy Corbyn hasn't translated into Scottish.
This is what I don't understand.
It is depressing at the moment for the Scottish Labour Party. The last time I checked the polls, they were sitting at 15% in the local council elections. This means complete obliteration in the council elections. I think Kezia Dugdale has made some blunders. There's absolutely no question about that at all. I think when she came out against Jeremy Corbyn on his leadership contest against Owen Smith was bizarre because everyone knew Corbyn was going to win that election. You know, there was no way that Owen Smith was going to win. So I think she should have just held back and said, I will support whoever wins it. Because what that's happened is it's created not even a semi-detached, but it's created a sort of detached UK and Scottish Labour Party.
Exactly, that's how it looks like.
And they need to work in harmony with each other. They need to be singing from the same hymn sheet. Now, don't get me wrong, the last Scottish election, I thought Scottish Labour were quite courageous, and I thought Kezia Dugdale's policy of raising taxes to reduce inequality was a good move. But recently, they've started talking about a new federal People's Convention. I think that is playing straight into the hands of the SNP because the SNP want Scottish Labour talking about the Constitution. They want them talking about more powers. They want them discussing London, Edinburgh, both parliaments. I think Scottish Labour need to stick on the NHS. They need to stick on policies which will try and reduce inequality. And when we're just talking about inequality there, only this week there was a report that came out, and this is staggering, that 1% of the wealthiest Scots own more wealth than the bottom 50% of Scots. Now, the SNP's been in for the past 10 years in government, and there's this myth that somehow they're progressive, or should I dare even say socialist. And I think that report really illuminates the inequality in Scotland at the moment.
Rob Roy McGregor, you'll be back. We'll be back. Thanks for joining us on the Sputnik.
Coming up next, civilian massacre in the Ukraine. Does anybody care? Don't miss it.
Welcome back to Sputnik. The NATO-organised coup which overthrew the elected president of the Ukraine, set fire to the parliament and set Nazi marchers in their hundreds of thousands onto the streets was bound to lead to war.
45% of the country are Russians. Crimea had been a main Russian naval port for 300 years and was given away by Khrushchev one drunken night when Russia and the Ukraine were both members of the USSR.
Eastern Ukraine, where the Russian people live, demands autonomy from Kiev. Ukrainian nationalism won't allow it. Cue massive violence and bloodshed. Joining us now is top author, writer and broadcaster of the first rank, Neil Clark. Neil, you've been writing and talking very powerfully on these subjects, but nobody's listening much in Britain. The narrative is the Russians are the bad guys in Ukraine. How has that come to pass? And what level of effort is required by the rulers in Britain to cover up the actual truth of this story?
It's amazing, really, George. It's beyond George Orwell, I think. We could call it Orwellian, but it goes way beyond that because we had a lot of talk, haven't we, in the media about the rise of the far right in Europe. We talk about Le Pen in France. We talk about far-right groups in Hungary and elsewhere. And yet, in Ukraine, just in 2014, you had an illegal coup d'etat against a democratic-elected government, during which at the forefront of that coup were far-right neo-Nazis. They were the cutting edge.
Yeah,
without the violence of the far right.
Hitler saluting,
yes,
Hitler
exactly.
collaborators.
Yeah, and so we have this sort of slur of calling people racist and fascist today, which has been a sort of standard technique to silence people of the genuine left, is being used by the fake left against genuine socialists. And yet in Ukraine, we've got real hardcore, genuine Nazis and neo-Nazis marching through the streets, and as I said, helping to topple a democratically elected government in 2014. And the so-called liberal left turned a massive blind eye to it all. It didn't happen. It wasn't there. And today we've still got the same problem of ultra-nationalists in the Ukraine. There's actually a state of emergency that's just been declared a state of energy emergency because ultra-nationalists are blockading coal transfers from the east, from the Donbass to the rest of Ukraine. Because they don't want the Poroshenko government to be having anything to do with the so-called rebels in the east. So the fact is that that regime change that coup wouldn't have taken place without the far right, without the neo-nationalists and Nazi supporters, Nazi sympathisers. And yet, as you said, in Britain and elsewhere in the West, we pretended not to see it.
The coup was clearly, I mean, organised might be putting it too highly, but it was certainly partly organised by NATO governments, by the American ambassador, by John McCain, by European ministers who were in Ukraine marching for the downfall of another government. We're complicit in all of this.
Oh, absolutely. And I think $100 million was earmarked really for the regime change operation for America. And a key player in all of this was Victoria Nuland at the US State Department. And she's a neoconservative. Her husband is Robert Kagan, who was one of the notorious pushers of the Iraq War. So you've got neocon fingerprints on this operation all the way through. And you know, you've got people like John McCain, as you just mentioned. He went out there to Kiev and he dined with one of the most notorious far-right leaders in Ukraine, someone who talked about the menace of Jewish Bolshevism in the past, anti-Semitic comments like that, which, you know, if you'd had a leftist or a socialist politician dining or sharing a platform with somebody who'd made those comments, and of course that would be totally beyond the pale and siding with fascists, and they would be completely blackballed. But that's not the case with John McCain and the liberal left too. So it really is quite amazing that this is happening here in Europe. So happened in 2014 and it's still going on.
It's still going on. We've got a state of emergency. We've got a state of war. The Donbass is under massive Ukrainian military bombardment, civilian areas, civilians, old ladies lying dead in the street and so on. Yeah, we can hardly get that on the news. And when we do, it's through the opposite prism.
It's Russian aggression.
It was always going to, it was always going to lead to this, wasn't it? Once they overthrew the government, burned the parliament, the third act was to delegitimize the Russian language in the state and to effectively make enemies of at least 40%, maybe 45% of their own people. Where's it all going to end?
Well, absolutely. I think it was all deliberate. I think that if you did topple the previous government, which had tried to steer a balanced course, it was claimed to be a pro-Russian government. It wasn't particularly pro-Russian. It was trying to balance the political divisions in the country and try to represent them. And it was obvious that when that government was forcibly toppled and there were the discrimination against the Russian language, that the predominantly Russian minorities in the east of the country would want to separate, and the Crimea, of course, the people voted to do that. And that, of course, is used as the referendum they had in Crimea to rejoin Russia. Don't forget Crimea being part of Russia from 1783 until 1954. You know, the democratic referendum there was taken as a sign of Russian aggression and Russian invasion. And I think we've got to link this in with Syria too, George, because I think there was a sort of element of wanting to punish Russia by the neocons in the US State Department for the way that Russia had blocked regime change plans in Syria. Assad was meant to have gone in 2013, or by 2013. The Russians, as we know, and the Chinese blocked UN resolutions which would have given the cover for US military action directly against the Assad government. The narrative that we're hearing on Ukraine, the dominant narrative, is false. It's completely the other way around. The aggression was from NATO and from the US and from the EU. And we're in very dangerous waters here because the real hardcore hawks really would, I think, welcome or want a war with Russia. I think they would risk what they would think would be a small-scale war with Russia over this. And of course, this
I don't
is
think
what's
Russia
happening.
does small-scale wars.
No, but this is the viewpoint of a few of these fanatics.
Yes.
They're saying, look.
Well, look, McCain called this week for lethal defensive aid to the Ukrainian government and still more, I don't know how they could find more, but still more sanctions against Russia. And he's now embraced, of course, by most of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
There's been a fusion of the Republican neocon hawks and the Democratic Party and the liberal media establishment against Trump. And so you've got McCain with his war talk being effectively cheered and echoed by the likes of Michael Moore.
Michael Moore, absolutely. Michael Moore, who made that wonderful film Fahrenheit 9/11, when he was lambasting the Bush-era neocons, is now lining up with the very same Bush-era neocons to lambast Trump. And, of course...
he said this week to Trump, "Be gone, you Russian traitor."
Yes, it's incredible, isn't it? He's in full McCarthyite mode, isn't he? And it's really tragic to see someone like him, who made such good films, 10, 15 years ago, now lining up with the most reactionary, aggressive, far-right figures in American politics.
And
Russia's not going to back... Sorry.
No, I'm just thinking that how do they think that the American, the normal population, even care, about all this is going on, the Russian aggression in Ukraine.
They speak of little else but the Donbass down in Peoria.
Yeah, well, of course, it's a massive distraction, isn't it? Because, of course, and same as here, because the Russophobia that's been pushed by the British government. Only, 2 weeks ago, we had Michael Fallon, the defence minister, going up to his alma mater in St Andrews University in Scotland. A terrible speech he made about the Russian aggression and Russia invading Ukraine. Yeah. And, of course,
the students were placed on their best behaviour. They weren't allowed to respond, even if any of them had been of a mind to.
Yeah, and the British government, of course, George, has been... the British have been out there to try to convince Donald Trump not to go soft on Russia. Yes. So the British are playing a very pernicious role in all of this.
Well, the Russians are not going to back down. So what's next? Do you think the World Cup is the next propaganda offensive?
It is the next, and I think we're already seeing BBC programmes coming on about Russian football hooligans. There was one coming on tonight or last week. I think they're going to be repeated. This is going to build up, as my prediction is going to build up over the year, because the last thing...
Are they destroying public property like the English hooligans?
Yeah, exactly, yes. Well, I mean, obviously there are hooligans in Russia, there's football hooligans like there is everywhere. But this is now... It's kind of relentless, isn't it, George? It's sort of 24/7 negative news about Russia and Putin. We hear... talk about fake news, of course. The biggest example of fake news in the last 12 months has been the story of the Russian hack, even the American hack into which is unproven.
Wasn't a hack and wasn't Russian.
Yeah.
With all respect to my Dutch wife, we're told in the newspapers this week, the Russians are trying to fix the Netherlands general election.
Yes, of course, yes. And of course they've got the German one to do, and they've got the French to fix.
Germany, okay, so France, Putin... okay, but why would Russia bother trying to rig the Netherlands election? It's an electorate of 2.6 million voters. Something like that.
Well, Putin, he's all over the place, isn't he? He's interfering left, right and centre. So it really is. I mean, he's laughable in a way. We can laugh about it.
Yeah, you laugh or you cry.
Yeah.
Neil Clark, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on the Sputnik. And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
So I asked, will Scotland undergo Indyref 2? And the Scottish referendum thing seems to always cause this buzz. So lots of response on that. And Ashok, for example, says, when? There's debate, but no dates. And Bob Smith-Walker says, I'm a big supporter of GG, but with a hankering for Indy.
Well, first of all, Alex Salmond announced the date, although Nicola Sturgeon hasn't even yet decided that there's definitely going to be a referendum. So there seems to be some sign of tension at the top of the SNP between the former leader and the current leader. My guess, I may be wrong, is that there will not be a second independence referendum because I'm absolutely certain that,
just hot air.
That they would lose it. and they cannot afford to lose it. They have to keep a strategy of maybe, probably, going for as long as possible, unless people get tired of that. Look, I'm not against independence in all circumstances, and I'm in favour of having this second referendum, because I'm sure that I'm going to win it. But there could be circumstances. I mean, if you told me the Tories were going to be in power in England forever, well, I'd have to look again. But if you told me Jeremy Corbyn has a chance of being the Prime Minister of Britain, including Scotland, I'd rather have that.
That'd be much better.
Really.
Absolutely. And that's all the tweets that we have for today.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
But you can stay in touch with us on social media, Twitter and Instagram, RT_Sputnik, or Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.